While the government talks about building a first world Singapore dream, the reality on the ground often looks like this: severe flooding paralyzing Nairobi streets and trapping school buses. It is no surprise that critics and media outlets have resorted to mockery. They have coined terms like Singa-poor and Singaporean to highlight the glaring gap between the administration's vision and the everyday struggles of its citizens. The root of that skepticism comes down to the math. This chart shows exactly how much of Kenya's national revenue is eaten up by debt. You can see a massive 50% block of ordinary revenue being drained right off the top, just to service existing obligations. The country's overall debt-to-GDP ratio, a metric comparing what a government owes to its total economic output, is sitting at a stifling 67%. When half of your national income is trapped paying off past liabilities, building a first-world nation seems mathematically impossible. But while the internet was making jokes, they missed something crucial. The government recently passed the National Infrastructure Fund Act of 2026. It is a piece of legislation that mirrors the scope of the 1965 Sessional Paper, the foundational document that first organized Kenya's post-independence economy. If you look at Section 3 and 4, you can see how this fund operates differently than a standard budget. It functions as a body corporate, a legal entity that can own assets, borrow commercially, and invest directly, allowing the government to move large-scale projects off the national books. The framework laid out in this law is a direct, legally binding replica of the Temasek model. Temasek Holdings is the state-owned investment company that Singapore established in 1974 to manage its assets and drive its rapid economic ascent. Kenya isn't relying on hope. The state has legally installed the exact proven instruction manual used by one of the wealthiest nations on Earth. This flowchart shows the mechanical difference between the two approaches. On the left, you have the traditional borrow-to-build cycle in red, which relies heavily on taking out expensive foreign loans. On the right is the new invest-to-build green cycle, shifting the strategy from taking on debt to leveraging equity. The core mechanism driving this new cycle is called asset optimization. The government is taking mature, profit-making state-owned enterprises, like ports and pipelines, and privatizing them by selling shares. This process converts stagnant equity into liquid capital. The state extracts massive upfront value to fund new infrastructure, without raising civilian taxes or begging for another loan. By monetizing the assets it already owns, the state creates a self-sustaining financial engine capable of funding the next generation of megaprojects, completely detached from the crushing national debt burden. To see how this works in practice, we can track its very first execution, the privatization of the Kenya Pipeline Corporation through an initial public offering, or IPO. An IPO is a process where a state-owned or private company offers shares to the public for the first time to raise capital. Ringing the bell at the Nairobi Securities Exchange, this single move generated an immediate influx of cash. The IPO secured 106 billion Kenyan shillings in seed money for the new national fund. That cash isn't sitting in a vault. Between 15 and 20 billion shillings from those proceeds are being injected directly into expanding the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. Specifically, this capital will finance the construction of a much-needed second runway and a new terminal, directly solving one of the region's most notorious logistics bottlenecks. The model is already functioning in real time. The government took a stagnant pipeline asset and turned it into an active airport expansion without adding a single shilling to the national deficit. But here is the obvious concern. In the latest Corruption Perceptions Index, Singapore ranks 3rd in the world. Kenya ranks 130th. The public has a very real fear that this massive new pool of capital will just become a target for political embezzlement. To prevent this, the NIF legally enforces a strict hands-off corporate structure. Looking closely at Section 6 of the Act, it permanently separates government policy decisions from the day-to-day management of the investments. The law requires that 4 members of the board must be independent professionals, recruited competitively, rather than appointed as political favors. They must also have over 10 years of senior leadership experience in corporate finance or development banking. And if someone does try to steal from the fund, the punitive measures are severe. The law mandates repayment of twice the stolen amount, plus a minimum fine of 10 million shillings or mandatory jail time. The NIF operates as a legally fortified vault. structured to make political interference and corruption mathematically and legally prohibitive. This chart shows the ultimate 10-year trajectory of the National Infrastructure Fund. It tracks that initial 106 billion shilling seed money as the state aims to mobilize a massive long-term target, 5 trillion shillings over the next decade. This capital provides the funding for specific energy infrastructure, primarily the generation of 10,000 megawatts of additional power to support industrial growth. It also targets critical transport and agricultural networks, paying for the construction of 50 megadams to stabilize food production, and extending the standard gauge railway all the way to Kisumu and Malaba. 5 trillion shillings is the estimated cost to close the infrastructure gap that currently separates Kenya's transport and energy networks from those of a developed nation. The legal blueprint now exists, the laws are signed, and the initial capital is hitting the accounts right now. The underlying philosophy here is that nations don't develop because their starting conditions are perfect. They develop because leaders make deliberate, structured decisions to build for the future. But this leaves us with a critical question. Does adopting the exact financial model of Temasek guarantee economic success? Or is a nation's deeply ingrained political culture ultimately more powerful than the text of its legal blueprint? We want to know what you think. Will Kenya's execution of this new economic software truly bridge the gap between the joke of Singa-poor and the reality of Singapore? Let us know in the comments below.